Good evening. Good evening, members of the School Committee, Finance Committee, and Board of Selectmen. I want to thank all of you for coming here tonight, and I was asked to say a couple of words to open it up. I understand each of you needs to open your meeting, so if you want to do that first, we can start with.
I'd like to call the meeting of the Board of Selectmen to order.
I'd like to call the school committee meeting to order.
I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Thank you, Julie.
Great, thank you. We were asked by the chairman of the Finance Committee through several meetings that we've had to pull together with the school administration a meeting of all three of these very important boards in the town to talk about upcoming budget, some unfortunately upcoming mid-year budget cuts potentially at the state level, and to start to work together jointly and collaboratively on looking at the school building reuse project and a number of other projects that impact the entire town, but specifically these three boards and commissions. So we are here this evening, the school superintendent, myself, Ed Kazanovich, and Howie Barber, as well as all of us here, just to listen to your conversation about this, to take guidance from you as we prepare our budget going forward, and to answer any questions that you may have while you have this discussion. So we just want to thank you for the opportunity. For those of you who haven't participated in joint meetings before, we have had them in the past, and they've been very successful. We've talked about items like the middle school, we talked about the budget, we talked about capital, and we actually had brought in some financial policies that were adopted by each of these boards, so Finance Committee and Board of Selectmen. So we will also be coming in with some new financial policies potentially over this winter that we want to bring to everyone's attention at some point also. So thank you very much for bringing this together.
Great, thank you, Julie. I'm going to open this up just to move us along. I know we have an hour. There's a school committee meeting after this. There are several new items or challenges that are going to affect our budget in this coming year from both the municipal and school side. And we have an agenda of items that we'd like to discuss, at least most of them tonight, be it brief or not, and I know Eddie can fill us in on a couple of things. This is all circulating around the budget and budget process, which is kicking off next week. The particular items that I would like to focus on would be the elementary school's reuse disposition, our Bay Path project and its effect on the budget, a discussion of future land acquisition, trust fund, and funding options. There is a potential for fiscal 14 mid-year state budget cuts. I'd like to get some comments from Eddie on that. And if we have some time, just an update on a circuit breaker. I'll say issue. It's actually, I'm going to call that a minor issue right now that we may need to take some action on the next month or two. So the first item, I had asked, I think it was Dr. Brunel and the town manager to set up an elementary school reuse committee. And Julie, if you can help out on that, I'm not too sure. It's made up of some number of townspeople and then board members, et cetera. So can we clarify that?
Certainly.
Julie, before you get started, could I just ask if this meeting is being recorded? I want to say this meeting is being recorded. Is there anyone else recording this meeting? Right. No? Seeing none, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, George.
Sorry.
Yep.
Thanks, George. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, sorry, Julie.
That's important. Thank you. Yes, the chair of the Finance Committee did ask me to put together a committee to look at the reuse options potentially for the Mary D. and Julie B. schools if and when the school department and school committee declares the property surplus. In anticipation of that, we put together an outline of what the committee would consist of, and it would be 7 members at this point, and we would have 1 member each to represent the Finance Committee, the school committee, and the Board of Selectmen. I believe we have 2 of the, actually right now we do have 3, we have all 3 representatives from each of them. In addition to that, we would then have the town planner, who We just started the interviews today, actually, for a new town planner. Adam Burney, our previous town planner, had left, and we are interviewing this week and next week for a town planner. So we should have one on board by the end of the year. So we would have our town planner, and we wanted to have our building commissioner, and it's a little premature because we were going to announce it next week, but I do want to tell you that we did hire and make an offer to a building commissioner who will be starting on December 15th, and haven't had a chance to tell anyone, this just actually happened today. But we have a great person in place that I will give you more information on. He is a current town employee and has been working with the town. Actually, I might as well, with the permission of the board, to say this prior to the meeting on Monday. Caleb Moody, who has been in the DPW Facility Management Department, also has all the qualifications for a local inspector. He has been working with us as a local inspector for the last month since our building commissioner left. And we have made an offer to him, and he's accepted to move forward to become the local inspector. And then, under state law, you have a year to get all your certifications to then wear the commissioner's hat. So Caleb Moody will be participating as well. And then we also, on the committee, to round out, in addition to the town employees that would be on it, we recommended that we have between 2 and 4, and I believe we said that because we weren't sure how many town employees we needed to have on there. We weren't sure if these positions would be filled, but we need to keep the committee at an odd number. So it would have to either be 7 or 9. So at this point, we are looking to have 1 to 2 residents from hopefully each of the neighborhoods that these schools are located in. We felt it was important to get neighborhood representation from residents who are actually going to be impacted by this. So while we've had a couple of people express interest from the community, they weren't specifically in that neighborhood. Within the last 3 days, thanks to Dr. Mary Ellen Brunel, who put out the word that we were looking for people, we received actually 2 yesterday and 1 today. And they're in the process of just filling out the applications. Our feeling is, if we get a couple of residents from the areas, I don't want to restrict it and have to turn down a resident from those neighborhoods that's interested. It's an advisory group. I think it would be good to have multiple residents if we get that. So we're going to wait and see. We just have to make sure we keep it at an odd number. So that would be really the only restriction. So at this point, we still are looking for residents from the Julia Bancroft area. We don't have anyone specifically from that area, where I believe we have 3 applicants from the Mary D. area. So that's where it stands. We hope within the next week that we get these applications in from the residents. They did indicate interest and sent an email, but they just need to fill out an application that shows their address and some information that we just need to keep on file. And then we can hopefully call a committee meeting together. It would be nice to get one together before the end of the year to at least establish the parameters of what this group would be looking at. And primarily, it's to look at what are the reuse potentials of these 2 schools and what would the financial impacts be, both on the sale or reuse or taking them offline, as well as keeping them maintained during the time that they're not being used for school, and yet they have not yet been reused for another purpose. So that's where it stands.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And I do believe that there's already been some consideration on the school committee in terms of at least a budget number for those schools for the next fiscal year. I know it's preliminary. I'm not even asking for a number, but I know it's on the front burner and it's not stuck in the back burner, so am I correct?
We did have a number. We're still working on that number and unsure of exactly what it's going to cost, but I believe we've got it covered. Dr. Brunel?
We do. The original draft budget had a value of $62,200 between Julia Bancroft and Mary D. And that included funding for oil or gas, depending on what the school used, as well as some minimal monies for utilities and maintenance and upkeep. But we are in the process of looking at budget reduction scenarios. We may be able to trim that down. We always start our budget with a value per gallon or per decatherm, and we're looking at that based on what's coming in new. So that may be able to be reduced, but that's our starting number.
Right. And just to be clear on that, where that will be within the school budget, that line item will be presented as one number to the finance committee, and that number will be negotiated, I'd say, before it comes to us, and that number will only change after, in that event that the school department gives those buildings, those properties back to the town.
Correct.
Correct, just so we're all clear on that. And that's another reason why I wanted to bring this up now, is you have your budget, and we can comment on it, ask questions on it, but the number that you come up with for covering those facilities, you've got to either live with or take advantage of until such time as those facilities go offline from the school department.
Correct.
Thank you. Excellent. I think that's all we need to discuss on that at this point in time, and we'll figure out a way to put that committee together and get a first meeting date sometime, hopefully by the end of the year or very early next year. That'd be great. The second item is the Bay Path project. Quite a bit of confusion regarding the actual funding mechanism for Auburn's portion of the renovation, expansion, everything that's going on up there. I believe once the final votes were in, because it's a regional school district and a couple other reasons, the financing for the interest and principal, and Eddie, you can please help me out on this, will actually be buried in their school budget, in their operating plan. Therefore, we're going to need to take a special look at that, because I don't believe the Finance Committee anyways wants whatever number per year that has to go for debt and interest on that to be taking away from another operating budget, be it schools, be it municipal. We're going to have to be very cognizant of that. Any comments on that?
Sure. I think we've put it out there from day one that there was every expectation that we were going to get hit with a escalated debt and interest costs once some permanent bonding was done for the Bay Path School. So through our assessment, we've noticed an increase over the last year or two, minimal because that money was borrowed on a short-term basis. But we're now actually going to incur the actual debt and interest payments that we have to absorb through general fund revenues, because the first vote that went to Auburn only was a debt exclusion vote, and they need to pass it for all the member communities. They didn't get it, and they did a collective vote. That collective vote actually went to the voters as well, but it was not done as a debt exclusion vote. Therefore, we have to pay for that through general fund revenues, tax levy, or through any other local receipts. So we're expecting an increase for FY16 without the enrollment assessment as well. And I talked to the school business manager last week, who told me that Auburn's enrollment, effective October of 14, the enrollment is up 11 students. So as a result of that, we're going to pay a larger share of the assessment because our percentage of students is going up in relation to the other member communities. So that will definitely have an impact on the operational side of the budget for FY16.
Okay, do you have an idea, is it level principal plus interest? Do we have an idea annually what the debt and interest will be?
I think when they made a presentation to a joint meeting as well at the Auburn High School, I think the number that was floated was somewhere between $225,000 and $250,000. That was at an interest rate of like 3.25 or 3.50. They have received a lower rate. That level debt service will be lower than that. They haven't bonded the final leg of the project yet, but I've been told that it will be under the original estimate that was provided at that joint meeting. So our share was about $3 million and change. We estimated our level debt service payments to be around $225,000. We've already built in a portion of that in the assessment, but that assessment will increase in the next year or two until all the debt is incurred and borrowed.
Okay. And are we going to be able to track that from a bookkeeping perspective separately from the rest of their operating budget? Once again, just so we can be clear, the town of Auburn wanted to take care of this as a debt exclusion. I think we should still look at it that way. Once again, not to be impacting any other operating budgets for that reason.
Well, because it was a voted mandate, what we did is we added that to the tax levy with a 125. We started on 125, added the capital plus the assessment of Bay Path. That was debt and interest related for the new school.
So, Ed, obviously the number of students will change that. that number every year. But how much will it fluctuate otherwise?
I don't know, it depends on a lot of things. It depends on the level of state aid, the level of money they get for transportation, the operational side of the budget, the level of increase that is being recommended. It's been in and around 2%, 1.5%, 2%, if they hold true to that. Outside of the debt and interest obligation for the school, the assessment increase would be minimal. But then again, we have to factor in the enrollment increase as well.
So other than the enrollment, it's not going to be much different than the way we handle our school budget as far as, since we didn't go with a debt exclusion, it's going to be similar, the same costs, I'll say. We're going to incur the same type of costs, transportation things, homeless transportation, all of the regular items that we address as a district. Those are the only changes we're going to see?
Well, they're a school district, so they're getting a payment from each member community. Their formula is somewhat different than ours, but for the most part, their level of increase is driven by the same costs that drive the school budget as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and to that, we've been, I think, helpless in terms of really changing or making a significant change if we disagree with the level of funding and Auburn's
Right.
assessment on that. It's just one of those things.
That formula can never change, right, Kevin? The formula that was drawn up in school.
That's my answer.
All right, good.
Eddie, thank you very much. Some more to follow on that. It's just going to make, I think, the budgeting a little bit more complicated, but I know the Finance Committee is committed to making sure that the over and above debt and interest assessment for the renovation expansion is truly treated separate. It shouldn't be part of an operating budget. We were kind of stuck with that formula within the tax levy. Our next item is a discussion on future land acquisition, trust fund, and funding options. Julie, can I defer back to you on this one? I know things have evolved, certainly with the Southhold Road thing, and I'm not too sure how general or specific we want to get on that. I know depending on what we do with Southhold Road will have a budget impact.
Through the chair, I actually, with permission, would defer to Selectman Ken Holstrom. He had raised this issue and asked that we put this on the agenda, so I'm going to let him speak.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, through Julie, our town manager, and myself, we've done some research on this, and that's why it's on the agenda for tonight. And presently, Auburn's reacting to that 61A notification for the Southhold Road land and the anticipated purchase as outlined in the Mass General Law 61A. We as a town should be proactive in the possible future open space acquisitions as addressed in the master plan. The Board of Selectmen, with input from the Conservation Commission and Finance Committee, should be developing a funding mechanism for potential future open space acquisition. I had attended the hearing on the open space and recreation plan held in 2012. That meeting identified some uses for open parcels and a number of priorities. The Planning Board in February 2006 adopted the master plan, which addresses open space acquisition as well. In part, and this comes right from the master plan, it encourages the protection of undeveloped open space through overlay zoning and public land acquisition, continued use of farmland for agriculture and acquire or preserve those lands whenever possible, and planned for the acquisition of private lands that have open space value to the town as they become available. Finally, and part of the master plan also, Auburn has comparatively little open space, and continued land development consumes additional land each year. The town should become more active in purchasing open space before it's lost, and that comes directly from the master plan. I would ask that the town administration look into developing recommendations for funding any anticipated future open space land acquisition, since the Chapter 61A notification process provides a small window for the town to conduct its due diligence and identify funding sources for acquisition. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I'll actually open that up to any comments. My owner that whatever we do in terms of a funding mechanism, call it a rainy day fund or land fund anyways, is going to be competing against, A, worn-out taxpayers, if there are worn-out taxpayers, B, other financing needs that the town has, and C, our own operating budgets. So I know, Ken, you had mentioned, at least from what you were reading, is we do have very little land left, and I know that
Correct.
that is purposefully not very specific on acreage or that kind of thing. I know we've got a couple of big parcels left in town, and the rest, I'm sure, are much smaller pieces of that. In terms of a funding option, I don't believe the Finance Committee should be taking a lead in terms of an idea or a strategy on that. And certainly, I think we could respond to something that comes forward on that. That's my personal opinion and not the opinion of the board, my committee.
Okay, and I believe possibly you may be correct in that, but a little oversight, just to see exactly where we are, because it will fit into the budget one way or another if it's decided upon. So I think a little oversight by the Finance Committee will give it a little bit of input and just bring it whole. Thank you.
That's fine. And one further comment on it, because I was actually close to the Post property as part of my job in banking, and that's why I recused myself from getting involved with whether we were going to purchase the land or not, and I still am recusing myself from that, is I do believe at no point in time the town had an option to buy that land, and I could defer to Julie or Ed. So I don't believe we missed an opportunity on that until it came forward to us in August. And I could be correct on that?
That is correct.
Yes, that's correct. Until, the land is privately owned, and until the town receives a formal 61A notification under chapter, Mass General Law, the town has no opportunity to purchase it.
Right. Does the town, further to that, have an opportunity, and I'll be very specific on it, the Kelly Street property, the Krasowski family farm up there. Does the town have the right to approach that family and say, hey, look, we'd like to preserve this as open space, we want to offer you X amount of dollars now, just to avoid really the incredible pricing that went on up at Southhold Road?
Through the chairs, the floor chairs, yes, towns can approach a property owner and discuss the potential acquisition of the property. If it does follow, it still would follow under Chapter 61A, Section 14, for a change of use from agricultural to another use, and maybe that use would be preservation, open space, development, it could be anything. So there are still 61A processes that need to be followed, but on top of that, if it is not a bona fide purchase and sale that's been made to the seller by a potential buyer, and the town is indeed the one that's pushing to get this done, then the town does need to, the process is outlined in the chapter that discusses the appraisals that are required. I believe each party gets an appraisal, and if there's a disagreement on it, then there's a third appraisal. So there is a process to be followed for determining the value of that land. There's one other, well, there's probably several other, but one other opportunity that the town can look at, which is to look through a not-for-profit such as the Greater Worcester Land Trust to see if there's any opportunity to partner with them, the state, and any other foundations that may be in the area that are willing to purchase those types of parcels generally for open space, and generally those purchases also have restrictions on them. The town has had several meetings with the Greater Worcester Land Trust and the Mass Audubon since August, when we received the notification of the South Hill Road project, and at the same time, we raised the issue of other 61A lands in town, because we don't want to have to wait to be notified to start looking at what our options are. So we have asked the Greater Worcester Land Trust and the Mass Audubon Society to take a look at that property and to look at their potential funding sources for future reference, to see if there's any opportunity to partner with anyone else on some or all of that land, if and when the town may make a decision to do such. We wanted to at least be able to present to the board what their options are, and if they want us to go ahead and make that type of, pursue an opportunity to purchase it.
I'll follow that up with one question, then I'll try to shut up. In terms of the decision to purchase a piece of land and how we finance that, does that follow along the same rules that nobody was really clear on through town meeting? Or does that go to the tax, to the voters, in terms of how that process would work?
Under Chapter 61A, which is the agricultural land, and Chapter 61B is forestry land, so they're both still under Mass General Law, Chapter 61. Under that, the Board of Selectmen is a specific entity that has to take the vote to either exercise their right of first refusal, waive their right of first refusal, or assign their right of first refusal to a not-for-profit that would purchase it on behalf of the community and then hold it under, I believe, 70% of it at that point has to remain in preservation. So the board has that vote, but the board cannot take such a vote to exercise its option to purchase without having the authorization from town meeting to fund that purchase. So their vote to exercise their option to purchase would be not a viable vote, because there would be no funding behind it if it wasn't for having a town meeting vote for giving them the appropriation. You can also go to the voters and look at a debt exclusion. That wasn't something that we were looking to do because there were other funding options on the table. Many communities have to do that because they don't have the opportunity to have other options. But in either case, the board cannot take a vote without either a ballot question for a debt exclusion or a town meeting vote appropriating the funds for them to do so. If they were to do that, the seller could technically say that they didn't act appropriately, didn't act in time, and therefore they would lose that 120-day window in which they're given to act.
Okay.
I just want Julie to follow up on one thing. If you could just explain the, the opportunity that the property owner has to lift the 61A designation, and after a year, it goes back to private property.
That's right.
'Cause we need to start looking at this now and addressing it now.
A property owner, these 61A properties, they are privately owned, and the classification as 61A is just that, it's a classification. It still has a zoning, so this particular property in Southfield Road is zoned residential, but it's classified for tax purposes through the assessor's office as agricultural, which means that there is a reduction in real estate taxes because it's being used for agricultural purposes. In order to get out of the 61A designation, a seller would just need to file for a change of use with the assessor's office, or actually, I believe it's a matter of not filing for the exemption. I think if they don't file for the exemption by September of every year, the exemption goes away. 12 months later, the property comes out of 61A, it's still privately owned, and the town has no option to purchase on it because it's still privately owned. So the town, in any case, if an owner decides to do that, they can completely circumvent a 61A notification process, and the town would not have any option to purchase. If they, again, take it out of 61A, pay the taxes on it for 1 year, put it back into the classification of, in this case, it would have been residential, and the town would have had no opportunity to even purchase it. I should mention that the process has been frustrating for a number of people, and, it's a good opportunity to explain to people. The Board of Selectmen has done their due diligence, and they've been under a lot of pressure to take a vote early on. And in our opinion, and certainly in town council's opinion and advice, his recommendation was clearly, do not take that vote early on. You've got to wait and follow through the process. 120 days is not a lot of time to do all the due diligence that needs to be done on something like this. We've been working on it since August 12th. A lot of people put a lot of time into it. The board has had 4 public hearings. They've just continued the hearing, which was recommended by town council to do that. They couldn't take a vote prior to having the town meeting vote. And then once town meeting voted, there is a 7-day waiting period, not including Sundays, which means 8 days, for the vote at town meeting to be certified. So the board couldn't take a vote prior to 8 days, prior to that 8-day mark after town meeting. So the timelines were really restrictive, and they worked within those timelines. We recognize that the 61A process is, quite frankly, it's not a very good process for communities that have town meeting form of government. For cities that, or some towns that have a city council or a town council where they meet on a weekly basis and they can make funding decisions outside of town meeting process, 120 days is still a tight time frame, but it may work because they don't have to schedule town meetings. So for communities that have a town meeting process, whether it be representative or open town meeting, it's a very cumbersome process. There's a lot of work that goes on and behind the scenes with the analysis and the legal and the review of everything that comes in. 120 days really is not very good. It is state law, and I would say that if you're okay with me saying this, today I had a meeting down in the State House and went into Senator Moore's office after to talk about the possibility of putting forth some type of legislation or change, amendment to the legislation to see if we can change that 120 days. And I'm going to be meeting with Representative Frost, and then I'd also like to meet with the MMA, which is the Mass Municipal Association. I'm on their Regional Public Policy Committee, and we look at legislation, support legislation, where it's important. And I think this is important not just to Auburn, but to any community in Massachusetts. Almost every community has 61A land, and at some point, other communities are facing or already have faced what Auburn's faced, which is a tight deadline. It's restricted by the law. You have to follow the law. And if we can try to extend those deadlines out and perhaps revise or tweak or amend that legislation, we might not be in this type of situation that we're in the future. So it's again, I don't want to speak for Senator Moore. He hasn't even heard of this yet, but we did meet with his staff today to talk about the possibility of them pursuing this.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, anyways, it would just seem to me that not only is 120 days tight, but the fact that really the seller is only obligated to give us basically a number, which is the sale price, certainly the terms of the sale. But I think if we had a plan in front of us, I mean, we as in the town, we certainly could form a much better opinion on whether that plan fits in with what we want to do in that particular neighborhood or that part of the town. You know, let's face it, if Sundin was going to put in 5 mini mansions up there and told us exactly where he was going to cut a road into, we would have a much better idea on whether we should be trying to protect open space or protecting our schools because we're concerned about population, et cetera, than simply saying, well, here's the number, you got 120 days, what do you want to do about it? And I only bring that up because with the Kelly Street property anyways, I'm hoping we don't wait until there's a hostile event, and I'm calling South Old Meadows, that was a hostile event. It's going to be more expensive in the town, whether we do nothing or whether we take it over in any way, shape, or form. It would seem to me that if we can be, let's just say, pursuing what's going on up at Kelly Street, if there is anything there, and maybe try to manage whether a developer makes sense to go up there or not.
Through the chair, that's correct. And just to clarify it, under Chapter 61A, Section 14, the seller is only required to provide notification to the town. There's a process for that notification, and they're required to provide a bona fide, we could consider a bona fide purchase and sale agreement. That notification does not need to include anything other than what is the change of use. And in this case, the change of use is from agricultural to residential. So the word residential is the only thing that's required to be on the notification. So towns, in many cases, don't know any of the plans that are coming forward through the entire process. And I believe that's one of the reasons Selectman Holstrom had approached me, as well as the chair, to talk about the possibility of looking to the future and trying to potentially identify a funding source or an opportunity to at least offset the cost of an acquisition in the future should we ever need it. And the time to start looking at that is now, so then we're not scrambling. The problem that we had with this particular notification as well is we missed the grant cycles for the DCR. Because the grant cycles, those grants are due around May or June. And then they announced the grants in probably July to September. We got notified in August, so the next funding cycle isn't even here until May. Under the law, you're required to close 90 days after the board takes a vote to exercise. So we're required to close in March. No time to apply for a grant. So we've looked everywhere for grant funding, and it's going to be very difficult to find it. But if we can start looking to some other potential strategies for funding, we might not face this problem in the future.
George?
Yeah, you almost answered my question, Julie, I believe. It was to Ken's point, or to Ken's plan, I should say, As far as, I wasn't sure if he was speaking of putting a plan together so that we don't find ourselves in this position again, or actually an account where we could put money into. Is that legal for us to yearly put some money away toward purchasing this land? Is that the goal?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's something we have to take a look at and find out what kind of a funding mechanism it is. And I would leave that up to, our CFO and our town manager to take a look at that and see what the best option is there. But I think it's something we should be a little proactive with and just move on a little bit so that if we don't have another hostile event, as
Yeah.
Mr. Hussey has mentioned today, we'll be prepared for it.
Now, would that require a town meeting vote just to put something like that in place?
Through the chair, it depends on what type of, what is put in place. And actually, I didn't mean to leave out Selectman Carpenter, because he's also raised this issue with me as a concern. And he was very active in the master planning process. Back in 2006, the town master planning group came up with a recommendation that the town should revisit, here's just one example, which is the CPA, which is the Community Preservation Act. And the Community Preservation Act requires a ballot vote. So that goes beyond town meeting. That requires a general election vote to implement that. And at the time, that was not pursued. It was brought up to the select board at the time, and they did not vote to pursue that. Many communities chose to pursue it back in 2002, 2003, because state funding provided about a 50% match, and sometimes even higher for that. And basically what that is it is an additional assessment on a tax bill. So the residents do bear the cost of that, which is why it has to go to the voters. When those funds are raised, they have to be used and distributed amongst 3 different initiatives: affordable housing, preservation, and historic preservation. So open space preservation, historic preservation, and affordable housing. And affordable housing could be a affordable housing plan. So a lot of communities in 2002, 2003 did start adopting that. They adopted it for a few years. The state then started cutting back on their funds. And the funds come from the sales that are listed with the Registry of Deeds, and there's a whole formula that comes through with those funds, and the state cut back on them. Recently, Governor Patrick, I believe in 2013, in August, put $25 million back into that fund to try to provide monies to communities again, to start supporting it. So it could be something that the town wants to look at, and you can put exemptions on it for seniors. You can put exemptions on it for low income. You can put exemptions where you're not going to put an assessment on property that's valued $150,000 or less. There are many things that you can do, but that does require a full vote. Another thing you can do that would require a town meeting vote, because it would go through the budget, would be to look at setting up a fund similar to a capital fund or similar to the OPEB fund, where you set aside a percentage of your budget every year to go into that fund. And then to spend the money, I believe, to allocate the money out, you'd still need a town meeting vote. I'm looking at Ed because he's the expert on this. So that would need a town meeting vote, but not a full vote. And then there are some smaller things that we're potentially able to look at for some strategies. But there's a whole range of solutions. Some communities years ago started land trusts. Those are private, they're 501c3s, and we do have the Greater Worcester Land Trust that covers the Worcester County, so it's probably not necessary because you already have one and they already access all the funds that a land trust here would be accessing.
Okay, one follow-up, and I don't mean to jump the gun, but would we be looking at, as Kevin said, there's a few larger properties, very few, and probably several smaller properties. Would we be looking at a way that we could store away enough money to buy those larger properties, or would we be looking at just putting enough money away for a down payment and then a funding mechanism from there? What do we, and again, if I'm jumping the gun, let me know.
Through the chair, I think it depends on the size of the property. If you're looking at the 61A property that's off of Kelly Street, that's about 303 acres on the Auburn side. You know, it's a pretty large property. I don't know that if you put something in place in the next year or two, you'd ever have enough funding set aside without taking a catastrophic hit to the budget for saving enough money for a purchase like that if you were intended to purchase the whole thing. Maybe for a smaller piece of land, you could set aside enough money. So it really, I don't think that the intent would be to fund an entire purchase, but perhaps to look at a funding source to offset it. So like this one took a while to figure out, how are you going to raise the money? Where can we cobble together the different pieces? In this case, $2.865 million is coming from bonding. But if we know in advance, maybe we can apply for some grants. Maybe we can get those grant funds put into place. Most grant funds have to have a project specific. They don't do it without it. But if we know it's coming and you can plan the timing of it, you can get, in some cases, up to $250,000 is one federal grant. That's about $400,000. It's very competitive to get them.
Thank you.
I have one point, and that would be for Ed. I believe we do have a fund established, or we did historically, many, many years ago. The town did put, I think, up to $10,000 at one time or another into a fund for open space. And I know we haven't put any money in it in years, but my understanding is it's still there. There's some money, and I have no idea.
Yeah, I think there's about $6,000 in there. I think it's a conservation trust. I'd have to look at the actual vote that was taken by town meeting that established that, whether or not that fund could currently be used to accept some money that is earmarked through the budgetary process. If not, there is legislation that was passed that will allow a community to adopt that without going for special legislation. So there are mechanisms in place that will allow a vote of town meeting to establish and create that account if the Conservation Trust does not allow for that right now. So once that's adopted, then we'd have to look at a mechanism to appropriate some money, whether it's through a percentage of the CPA that could be applied to taxation, or whether or not there's another creative way of earmarking some money on an annual basis that would allow the town to build up that account for situations and purposes that were identified by the town manager.
And now we go through the normal budget process, subject to town meeting vote to accept that or not.
Very similar to how we treat the stabilization account. It's appropriated on an annual basis. It stays in that. Any interest earned on that stays with the trust, and then when it's voted out, it takes a two-thirds vote of town meeting to draw out of the account.
Would any potential land trust account have the same advantageous towards the bond rating? You know, how if we put money in stabilization, we get credit for that when we go to bond rating. Would an account like this have the same kind of
It would be looked
advantage?
at as being very favorable, just like all our other trusts are.
Okay.
Although stabilization is computed as a percentage of our fund equity,
Right.
the capital would not, but it does sit favorably with the rating agencies.
Any other questions on this topic, comments?
Thank you, Ed.
Okay. If that were to come forward to us through the budget process, Ed, would that be through a master plan committee, through a board of selectmen taking a position on that, or how would that,
Well, I
assuming we don't have a mechanism now, and that's, there's an account, I think Dan said, but we don't have a funding mechanism if we decided to go that route.
Well, once again, I mean, this is something that we're going to have to discuss and strategize over. But I think what we've indicated to boards and committees as well as town meeting, once we hit our benchmarks on our financial policies, that would allow us now to maybe utilize a portion of free cash and appropriate it and put it into the trust. So it really wouldn't have an impact on the operational side of the budget. But until such time, we have to look at other creative ways of funding that.
Yeah, through the chair, right out of the master plan here, the Board of Selectmen, a responsible party, it says here to establish a local land trust to assist with open space acquisitions and serve as a local land bank. So I think that the Board of Selectmen would be involved in, putting something like that together.
Providing the direction on
Right.
that. Okay, just so everyone's clear on that, and if there's other committees, do we have an active master plan committee?
No.
Not at this point in time, right? We certainly don't have an open space committee anymore.
I'm not sure. I know John Anderson and Alexander Kolesser, and I know Ann Weston and Louise Downey were on the most recent open space plan. I don't know if it's still active. That would be
Through the chair, it is still active, it is still an open committee. The open space plan was submitted to the state this past June, and if we need to have any revisions, we kept the committee active to go back on that and to make any revisions and implement. And we're also looking ahead. The master plan was completed in, I believe, February of '06, and generally, master plans should have about a 10-year life. So looking ahead, they take about 2 years to do. So went into effect in '07, so we'd like to start this coming fiscal year 15, getting together a committee, starting to get the funding together to update and do another master plan, which again will probably take about 2 years.
My apologies to the open space committee. All right, any more comments on this? Good, that's good. Good discussion on this. Our next item is potential fiscal 14 mid-year state budget cuts. Ed, we're down to 15 minutes on this, and I know you can't talk as fast as Julie, but can you give us the short version? That would be great on that.
Actually, I can give you the impact on the general government side, and I think Mary Ellen, on how we would have more information as it impacts the school department funding through circuit breaker and transportation. But what we're hearing, what the governor proposed is a cut to the local municipalities by way of local aid. In our case, in every other community, a 2.7% reduction in unrestricted local aid. Excuse me. To Auburn, that means we receive about 1.4 million. That equates to about 41,000 and change, a 2.7 reduction. Now that is being opposed by the House leader, and how that is ultimately going to impact us and every other community is not known at this point in time. But for budgetary purposes going into 16, I can tell you that we've reduced unrestricted local aid by that 2.7% and level funded the rest of the cherry sheet items. So the cherry sheet is down slightly from level funding down about 41. There are some other impacts on the school side that are non-cherry sheet related. What that means in terms of total dollars, I don't know. We have a new administration on board, Charlie Baker is governor, and his staff. His budget is due to come out the end of January. That's when it historically comes out. It's too early to say what that will mean for at least projection purposes. So we're going with what we know now. There is a revenue shortfall of about $325 million. $25 million of that is coming through local aid. And so that's what we're going to build into the budget for FY16.
Okay, just to add to that, I know we had a mid-year cut several years ago.
Yeah.
6, 7 years ago. And I believe the way we addressed it in the short term was to kind of freeze any incremental spending, or we basically was bare bones spending for a while until the process worked itself out. So we're not at that point yet. I just want to be clear on that.
No, we're watching it very closely. Once a tax rate is set, we don't have the ability to change our revenue sources. We have set the tax rate, so that's something that we would have to absorb through the general fund operating budget or undesignated free balance of free cash, because our projections are higher than what we're actually going to receive. So how to address that? I think we would impose a freeze at some point. Maybe not fill positions in order to offset a portion of that 41, or maybe the entire 41. We're halfway through the year, so it's tough to make a correction to an adjustment such as that. As small as it is, it does impact the overall budget. And certainly the school department has to address whatever shortfall they're anticipating as well.
Did we skip item 2?
The fiscal 16 budget discussion, no, I thought we'd kind of wrap up with that.
Okay.
Okay. only because that wasn't really the most sexy item on the agenda. So I thought I'd hold that. Are there any other questions actually on the mid-year, I'll say, possible issue? All right. Then the last, I don't think we need to talk about the circuit breaker update. We'll
You can
pick
do
that-
it at a future time if you'd like.
Yeah, I think we'll address that at a future time. It might be a little bit more lengthy conversation on that. But regarding the fiscal 16 budget discussion, we have our opening budget or budget kickoff meeting next Wednesday, the Board of Selectmen's Room Finance Committee. There's usually no surprises with that. It gives a presentation on where things are with a certain level of detail on that. And thank you, Kim, for bringing that up. And we thought this would also be a good opportunity to open up for any kind of discussion relative to that. I know the school committee, you guys are already starting on your budget. I don't know why anyone would want your job. You guys work way too hard. It's unbelievable. But we did want to make sure that was front and center. Obviously, there's some variables. Every year we have that too. So I'd like to open that up if there's any comments on that. I don't think Eddie wants to hear about any wish list right now, or you should have gotten into them already. Kim, did you have anything outside of reminding me to bring up the budget?
No, I think the only thing one of the reasons that we wanted to meet with everyone was, it seems by the time we actually get a budget, there's not a lot of opportunity for us to make changes, or the town manager comes up with a recommendation based on what the Board of Selectmen sets for parameters on the amount of money that can be raised. The department comes in with their request, which if it doesn't match that, there's not enough money because the manager can't recommend more than the Board of Selectmen. It seems like the process is backwards, that the departments should be submitting what they need to their administration. School department should be submitting, I'm sure your principals submit what they think they need, and you say, okay, you've made a good logical request for this amount of money. But I can't fund all of that because there's 8 schools that have asked for really good things. But we'll fund pieces of it. We get requests that the town manager doesn't have the ability to recommend. Last year, the fire chief said he needed money for some equipment. The police chief has, for the last at least 3 or 4 years, come in saying that he needed money for police officers. But because of the mechanism that has been put in place for, and it didn't used to be, I've been around this process for a long time. This process didn't used to be. The town administration used to submit, or the town administration used to get from departments what they needed, and the administration would submit to the finance committee what the town could afford to pay, whether it was within the parameters of Proposition 2.5. But if you're limiting the parameters of 2.5, and by you, I'm saying the Board of Selectmen, if you're saying to them, okay, 1%, it's an arbitrary number. It's like picked out of the air, as far as I can see. It's an arbitrary number. We're going to raise it 1%. Well, what does that mean? That doesn't even cover the cost, probably, of health insurance increases. And it just seems like the process is backwards. And it frustrates me as a finance committee member to have department heads sitting saying, I really need this. And they made a good point. And the administration sits and says, well, yeah, it's on the priority list, but it's not recommended for funding because the Board of Selectmen directed us to only raise 1%. So I wanted to have a discussion with this group because that seems like a very bad way of running government, picking a percentage instead of looking at the needs and whether you can afford it.
I agree with you. I agree, that's difficult, and I understand your frustration. I think we take our lead from the state, which unfortunately, that's kind of the way that they operate. But I will say that we will try to come in with the best budget that we can every year, and there's a difference when we put a number on it, and we can say, this is the budget that we can do with, or we can say, this is the budget that's best for our kids. And usually, we're gonna start off with, this is the budget that's best for our kids. And then we'll break it down from there. As you said, if it's 1% that we're allowed, then we'll work with that. If it's 2% that we're allowed, but we're gonna come in and we're gonna let you know why we want what we want. And we're gonna and as Kevin said, we've already started working on it, and we will certainly do our part to get it to you as soon as possible.
See, I'm not, this criticism isn't school side, because I think you guys do it the right way. I think it's the general government side that does it the wrong way.
Yeah.
And that's my personal opinion. You know, I spent 10 years working as staff for the Finance Committee, and that's not how it used to be done. It used to be done just the way you guys do your budget. And it changed somewhere in the last 20 years and became this pick a percentage, and that's what we have to squeeze this big 5 pounds of potatoes in this 2-pound bag and try to get the same value for that 5 pounds or for that 2-pound bag. And it just doesn't work.
You're right, and I know you weren't critiquing us, and I'm just trying to put our theory out there and let you know that that's where we're
Yeah.
coming from, and it's true. 1% is not gonna, well, whatever, I don't wanna put a number on it, but whatever the number is that you throw at us, that you came up with in whatever way, is not gonna cover the things that we need necessarily, or the things that our students need, which is our number one priority. Like I said, can we get by with this? Yes. But do we want to give them this? Yeah, we want to give them the best education that they can get, and that's where we're coming in. And we'll always try to do our best to be thrifty in putting the budget together, but in the end, that's what we're coming across with, and in a timely manner, I'll guarantee you that. Thank you. Thanks for your comments.
Great, thanks, George. And Doreen, would it be possible for the Board of Selectmen to at least contemplate taking I'll say, a different approach in terms of, let's face it, we've done bottom right management in terms of our tax levy increase, and I know we're running short on time here. Kim has been bringing this point up since she's been on the Finance Committee, and it is a good point. I actually don't have an answer, and I don't even have a suggestion on another way to do things. I'm wondering if the board could take under advisement, maybe looking at maybe another approach, or maybe reaching out to another community, see how they actually go ahead and put their budgets together and still come back with something that is financially makes sense for the town, especially given the financial goals that we want to reach in the near term.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's not, and I agree that I don't believe it has to be a set number. It's following the financial policies to be sure that money is set aside, and not assuming that we're going to the 2.5. But I don't think that we've gotten to the point where we say, okay, we'll give you guidance, whether it's 1.25 or 1.3 or whatever. See how that works, and then and then come back to us. And maybe the timeline isn't right, but if there's a need, certainly, I can only speak for myself. We're not stuck on a number, but there has to be some guidance without saying, we can tax to the 2.5. Let's go to the 2.5. I want to say, we have professionals here. develop a budget. I should say, we have fiscally responsible professionals here. Develop the budget that you need to operate the town. And bring that back to us. That's
Great.
what
All right.
we should be
That's,
talking about. And
that's a
we'll
great
be sure
point
to talk
bring up.
about it on
In
Monday
the
night's
beginning of
meeting.
December, so that's great. And certainly, if you want to bounce things off of us paraprofessionals over here, that would be great too. I know we're just about out of time. I would like to thank everyone for taking some extra time out of their day for this. We got a lot accomplished. There's still some open items to take care of. I'm looking for, yeah, go ahead, Dawn.
Before you close,
Yeah.
Mr. Carpenter just had a point he wanted to make, and then I just wanted to say something before we close.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone, and I look forward to working with someone on each of these committees anyways in terms of the reuse. The sooner we decide, well, certainly with Dr. Brunel's okay, decide when we take those properties offline, the quicker we turn them into either other uses, sell them or whatever, it'd just be much more fiscally efficient for the town. So, Dan?
I just wanted to say to Mrs. Holstrom's point, this is my first budget process, so, you know, I think it's great that we do meet, and I hope that people do feel comfortable, whoever it is. I was at Wind Turbine just the other day, and they had a position on South Old Road. A couple of the committee members looked uncomfortable because I was sitting there. This is what we're here for. We're supposed to have exchanges of ideas, and if you have a better way of doing it, I'm certainly willing to listen to anyone at any time. So thank you very much.
And I just want to say thank you all for being here, and I just feel I have to mention, Mrs. Brotherton isn't here tonight, our board member, and, today is the 15th anniversary of that horrible fire in Worcester, where 6 Worcester firefighters lost their lives, and it was Denise Brotherton's husband, Paul Brotherton, one of those who lost his life, and I know that these anniversaries, I've attended the service that she's at now for many years, and it's especially difficult for her and her boys, and I would just ask you all to just remember them and think of them tonight as we move on. Thank you.
Thank you, well said. I'll accept the motion to adjourn from the finance committee.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Motion adjourned.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you
all.
very much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.